Okay, I'm here with Kashif Khan. He is the CEO and founder of the DNA company. He's a biohacker, celebrity longevity coach, and he's now the best-selling author of The DNA Way, How to Unlock the Secrets of Your Genes to Reverse Disease, Slow Aging, and Achieve Optimal Wellness. Kashif, welcome to the show for the second time.
Pleasure, man. Great to be here with you.
Yeah, likewise. Dude, we're just gonna jump it off right away.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm gonna tell you something, man. I saw that in your book it says that you were able to heal yourself from 5 chronic diseases and reduce your biological age by 10 years. I'm calling BS. I don't believe you. Tell me like how that is even possible, and like kind of like just some of the things that you were doing just by learning how your DNA works and the systems in place that you were able to do that.
Yeah, so aging, first of all, how do you even know what biological age is, right? So there's ways to measure, and I use multiple methods, and you've probably seen there's a lot of guys out there talking about this now. There's a guy, Brian Johnson, talking about how he spent $2 million. I don't think you need to do that. It's a lot easier than it seems, if you know where to prioritize and what to focus. And that's really what I did was I had eczema. I literally couldn't open my left eye. It was sealed shut. I had psoriasis, autoimmunity, where like if I would clasp my hands and make a fist, my knuckles would bleed because they were just so cracked up. Gut issues, couldn't eat, always washroom problems, migraines, and depression. I was completely dysfunctional. Couldn't work, had a lot of issues. So I was a business owner, right? I ran a marketing company, but I just couldn't get to work. So, anyways, when I measured my biological age, there was a couple things I looked at. Cardiovascular health. So when you measure biological age, there's no one single way to do it. My dad, my grandma, my uncle's cardiovascular disease was the problem. So I was focused there. And you can look at what's called arterial stiffness. So how old is the actual artery hardware, and how close is it to being plaqued up and heart attack level? And I was 5 years older. I was 38 chronologically, and I was 43 internally. You could also look with the carotid Doppler, your arteries here on your neck. Again, you can look at the level of plaque buildup, and that's a very good indicator of biological age. So again, I was about 5 years older, directly correlated with my arteries, same thing. Then you can look at what are called methylation markers. So how efficiently are your genes expressing? So your genes are constantly reacting to every environmental, nutrition, stress, relationship input. Your body's trying to constantly calibrate and do whatever you need in the given moment. And how efficiently you do that, methylation, is a sign of biological age. That was also about 5 years older, right? So across the board, they were very consistent. When I identified the biological failures in my body, not the symptoms, so forget about the sickness, why am I sick? Why all of a sudden all these things? And I started to learn that there were certain genes missing. There were certain genes that weren't instructing biological function properly. And I started to support those systems. Simple example, I don't have the GSTM1 gene. I'm completely missing it. So forget not about what version or I don't have it. And it's a primary detoxifier of the gut, which no wonder I had migraines and gut issues. Right? So I had to be very diligent about what supplements to take and then what food to eat to support this, right? So when I started to focus directly on my red flags, not one size fits all, but the parts of my genome that were broken, I immediately started to feel symptomology go away. I immediately stopped having migraines. I immediately stopped catching the common cold every couple of weeks, which I used to, right? So inflammation down, immunity up. And I started to track. And about, I'd say 2 years into it, I had completely forgotten that I had tested my biological age as a benchmark. And I was sitting with my son, and he had the arterial stiffness monitor. He said, "Remember this thing?" I said, "Yeah, there's an app on my phone." And I was 33. So then I went and checked the other stuff, and it was around 32, 33. So I went from 5 years older to 10 years younger, right? And it just this eye-opening, like, wow, everybody can do this. And imagine if I really got into the biohacking stuff, which I'm now doing, right? Let's see if we can get that to 23, right? So that's kind of the journey I went down.
I'm really happy you said that because there's a lot of testing for age right now, and people refer
Yeah.
to telomeres and the telomeros And now I'm hearing that a lot of those tests are complete bunk and they're just not accurate. And I don't think they were doing that on purpose to deceive people. I think they were really trying to use some kind of benchmark or marker to predict age. And you didn't even list that. You just actually talked about cardiovascular health. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were going to bring in telomeres, and I wanted to ask you. So that's really neat. That no, that had nothing to do with telomeres. But do you think there is any test out there that's doing a decent job, just in your
Yeah, so
experience?
telomeres are important. It's the question of why is hard to pinpoint. So I was very specific. Like, here's my hardware that's failing, right? So I know that I'm pushing myself towards cardiovascular disease. I was very specific about looking at methylation markers and knowing what genes were over or under expressing, so I know which systems were failing, right? Telomeres are caps on the end of your DNA that the very basic understanding is that they're bumpers that take the damage so that your DNA itself doesn't get damaged. Because that's actually what aging is. Aging is oxidation and damage to your DNA, the mutation and degradation of the cell, and then the cell starts to literally unravel, the DNA unravels, and then your skin and your hair turns white, and the outward appearance of that inward damage starts to manifest, right? So telomeres are these caps that protect your DNA. And when I use the word cap, it's very confusing if you look at it because is it actually a bumper or truly a cap? Meaning that if they weren't there, we could live longer.
Mm.
And this is a question that science is now asking. At the same time that our DNA changed to make us who we are, as around a quarter million years ago, this cap appeared. And here's something interesting. I'm not a practicing Christian, I'm a practicing Muslim, but I have a lot of Christian friends. And I have a Christian friend who showed me that in Genesis 6:3, it says that there's a cap that's installed that makes us live to 120 years old, maximum, right?
Wow.
Now, if you look at the telomeres, they look like they're designed to last 120 years. If you have perfect choices on everything you do and you never cause inflammation or immunity problems, you will live to 120. So there's some correlation there. We don't know what's actually going on and where this is coming from, right? But long story short, telomeres are an effective measure. It's just hard to figure out why and what to do. It's just overall like, hey, you have inflammation. Well, what do I do about that? Right? So they do work, but combine it with cardiovascular testing, combine it with methylation. We have a product that we call de-aging because it's methylation testing, right? Um, Glycanage is also a great tool where you're looking at the. So anyways, there's multiple products out there that work now, but I wouldn't just pick one, layer and stack them to see where the pain point is.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so and then you guys created the DNA company because this got birthed from your own sickness and then you
Yeah.
studying and realizing, wow, this is actually really powerful. But talk just briefly about how the DNA company is different than any other DNA kind of company out there. You got 23andMe, people can go run their DNA, but you guys are really doing something unique and different.
Yeah, so genetics, which is what you're describing with 23andMe and everybody, it's akin to, medicine is I go to the doctor and they tell me what my disease is called and what pill to take, right? So symptom down, disease-centric thinking. My functional medicine doctor will tell me, here's why you got sick. Here's what you did wrong. The diet, environment, nutrition, choice, something you did. It's a habit. So same thing with genetics. Genetics is you have an 80% chance of Alzheimer's. Good luck. Functional genomics is, well, what do we do about that? What are the biological systems that aren't working? So a lot of people here are probably familiar with the ApoE3 gene, right? And it points to an elevated 8 to 10 times risk of Alzheimer's if you have a certain version. So you have to ask the question, what does that gene do? What it does is it determines the efficiency of your body transporting lipids, cholesterol. So the amyloid plaque that might develop in your brain, which leads to dementia and Alzheimer's, this gene is implicit because you're not moving the cholesterol around and so it builds up. The real question is, why was there inflammation in the brain for which cholesterol got deployed? So again, disease-centric thinking. They're thinking about the disease. All the funding around genetics is from pharma to make more pills, right? Okay, you have the ApoE3 red flag. You're not going to recover from Alzheimer's. You're going to get there faster, but we still don't know the trigger. The trigger could be maybe you're a woman that makes toxic hormones. in today's environment where there's so much hormone disruption, and that's an inflammatory insult. Maybe your insulin response is off. This is why Alzheimer's is now called type 3 diabetes, because the food you eat can drive it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you have bad cardiovascular hardware, right? And so your body is getting inflamed, and that leads to exponential metabolic dysfunction, which then leads to other organs like your brain and your kidney and liver suffering, right? So there's so many inputs that can lead to it. Gut brain connection. Me, GSTM1. I'm missing a key gut detox gene, which means if I didn't take care of that, I would have got leaky gut, which would have led to leaky brain, which would have led to toxic substrates exiting my gut and directly entering my brain, causing cognitive decline. All of those things are where you then need ApoE to send cholesterol to coat and deal with the inflammation, like a Vaseline that smooths things out.
Hmm.
So that's the difference between genetics, reacting to a disease, or functional genomics, asking why did it happen, which system is failing, and if I support that system, the disease can't happen.
I love that. By the way, ApoE, that's a big one like we talked about with Alzheimer's. And I don't know if you saw this, and this is not to trash Peter T. I think he's an amazing doctor. He's very smart, but I don't know if you saw he was
Yeah.
talking to some celebrity, Chris somebody. I don't
Chris
know.
Hemsworth, yeah.
I hope you reached out because I was a little mad with Peter T. He's like, "You are going to get Alzheimer's, like, because you have
Yeah.
the ape." I was like, no, he's not. Like, there's so many things he could do. I thought it was just such a bad move as a doctor, and I hope you reach out to that guy and be like, I can help you. Like, I mean, I don't know if you saw that, but I mean, come on,
I
man. Like,
saw it. It was nonsense, man. This is like what I mean is that, so here's the challenge is that clinicians aren't trained on functional interpretation of genetics because their training comes from pharma.
yep,
What pill does this point you to? It should just be another prescription. As opposed to ApoE is not about a prescription for a disease. It's about prioritizing what habits you need to work on. For you, the GPS is saying avoid Alzheimer's. There's a tree that fell down somewhere in the future, right? That's your GPS. And for you, it's Alzheimer's. For someone else, it might be cardiovascular. For someone else, it might be
right.
breast cancer. So we're not saying it's an 8 to 10 times risk, which is what he was told. He literally told Chris Hemsworth that. What
The
he
guy
should have
stopped
said,
acting. He goes, I gotta quit acting. I
yeah.
don't know what to do. I'm like, come on.
What do you do? The
Yeah,
anxiety that he induced in this guy alone will cause the Alzheimer's,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like the stress, the constant cortisol of like, I'm losing my mind. Okay, you probably will.
yeah.
So really what he should have said is we need to prioritize this. Your DNA is showing us where your hardware is failing. Now we need to make sure we never cause it the inflammation for the disease to manifest. The 15 top medical killers in the US, 14 of them are all rooted in inflammation. Cardiovascular disease, cancers, dementia, they're the same thing. The difference between which one you get, that Russian roulette that we're playing with our inflammation, is just which hardware isn't wired properly genetically. That will fail first. And then eventually, like every other American, you have 2 chronic diseases by the time you're in your 60s, and you have 3 by the time you're in your 70s, because they're all the same thing. They're inflammation. So if you get rid of the inflammation, none of them can happen. And the 15 out of the 14 that's not inflammation, which is actually the number 3 killer in the US, is medical error. It's just doctors making mistakes, which also requires inflammation to happen, right? So just
Yeah.
deal with this one thing.
It's so true. There's some great studies out of John Hopkins, which is a prestigious university, and I think I can't remember when it was done, but they did 50% of autopsies. They basically found out that the diagnosis they had originally diagnosed the person was completely wrong,
Yeah,
and so we diagnose people wrong most of the time. It's a guess. It's actually a guess, and we
it's
think
truly a
it might
guess.
be, and that's good to have these guesses and have these opinions, but to say that you have this, it's 50% of the time it's wrong. I mean, that's incredible. You guys, and when we talk, anybody that hasn't seen our first episode, we went through my DNA and we looked at and how these systems correlate. But for people that don't know and they didn't see that episode, talk about just how you guys look at the DNA in a way to make these conclusions to better operate the systems. And what I'm thinking is, there's like how many DNA strands are there? There's, I mean, like millions, right? I mean, they decoded the
Yeah,
entire genome, but you guys are looking at a select group of strands or I don't know if you call them polymorphisms, you're looking at a group of them only, and then you're coming up with these conclusions. How did you guys decide these are the ones that are, most important, or the ones that we need to really look at compared to maybe there's obviously millions or thousands other ones?
Yeah, so that came from what you said earlier, my personal journey of healing. And genetics was a tool I used. I'm not saying it's the only tool. There's many tools you can use. It's the tool that worked for me to find out why, answering the question, why am I sick? And so it was very difficult to use. Like there's 22,000 genes and many, many variants and mutations. So there's billions of data points you need to look at. How do you navigate that? Most PhDs don't know how to do that. The genetic PhDs, right? So to make it easy to use, we had to first determine what are the genes that matter. Most of it is noise. You don't need to know. And you'll see all these ads out there like we sequence 3,000 genes. We sequence the entire genome. Yeah, how many lives have you changed? Right?
Zero.
None, because
Yeah.
their products are not designed for the buyer of the test. They're designed for the buyer of the data on the back end. The genetic testing industry is not a great business to be in because your DNA never changes. So once you've done a test, did you retest? No, right? Because
Yeah.
your DNA is your DNA. It's
Yeah.
done. So the business model doesn't work. We have a different model where we support people clinically, and we said if we actually solve the problem, people will stick with us as customers and patients versus genetic testing companies that think with their blinders on that all we do is test. So they became data selling companies. So more is more. It's not true.
Yeah.
There's less than 100 genes out of the 22,000 that actually drive the functional pathways where all chronic disease comes from. Hormones, right? There's literally a handful of genes that drive your hormone cascade. Neurochemicals of the brain, another handful of genes. Your hardware, cardiovascular, what we just talked about, ApoE, where in your body is there going to be a failure first? So looking at those things. Diet and nutrition, metabolic health. Should I be keto? Should I be vegan? How do I actually metabolize starches? What do my insulin response look like? Everything about, and even the micronutrients, vitamin C, D, A. So these things matter. Sleep. Why is it that I can't fall asleep? My circadian rhythm doesn't work. Why I can't stay asleep? I sleep through the night, but when I wake up, I don't feel rested. Genetically, these are different problems, but we understand them very well. And then innate cellular health, that thing we said, inflammation. The cell being unhealthy is a root cause of disease. So, how do you detoxify? How do you deal with antioxidation? How do you deal with methylation or anti-inflammation? So there's these key processes that maintain the health of the cell. That's it. That's what you need to know from your genome. Is my ear connected to my head? I have a mirror. I don't need to buy a DNA test for that, right?
Yeah.
So majority of all of what we deal with comes from here. Now there's rare genetic markers that point to genetic conditions, rare forms of autism, sickle cell syndrome, these types of things, which you do need a genetic test for. We don't do that. But you likely already know you have that thing. If you're alive and walking around and you have a genetic condition, you likely know. And the solution isn't what we're talking about. Your environment, nutrition, and lifestyle habits need to align with your genome. The solution there is medication, right? And this is we don't deal with that. Right? So that is what the medical world is using that thinking and applying it to chronic disease, and that's why things don't work.
Yeah.
But they should continue doing that because that's what they're designed for. That's what they're trained for. So that's the difference. And these are the key systems and pathways we look at. And from here, we can inform really the root cause of any chronic condition.
It's really amazing. I was going back through my DNA profile and just, again, we went, if you look at our first episode, we went through each of the pathways, and it's just so amazing because, for example, if I went and got a blood test and it showed, Joel, you have low vitamin D. Well, the
Yeah.
solution is take more vitamin D. That could be the issue. That could be the issue. But like you said, and when we look at the systems that are in place, what if I'm just not detoxifying correctly? And I can keep supplementing with vitamin D all I want, but I'm not clearing toxins properly
Yeah.
because my detox pathway is messed up. Well, then the vitamin D may never even get synthesized because I didn't even fix that problem, which is leading to this problem. So I love that you guys created this system where you show how all these systems interact and can
Yeah.
relate. And so it's not just one. Oh, take more vitamin D. Well, that'd be easy, but it doesn't always work, and it makes sense.
Yep. And the reverse could also be true. You could be saying, well, I have depression and anxiety all the time. And so it's going to be treated as what you said, depression and anxiety. What if it's just a vitamin D problem?
Which happened with your niece. You want to talk
Yes,
about that? Your
exactly.
niece. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a great example
That's
of.
a yeah, perfect example of how to think functionally, right? So my niece collapsed, couldn't breathe, and had an anxiety attack. This is about 2 years ago. And I called a friend who's a pediatrician, which is a gut reaction, and he said it sounds like an anxiety attack. What you just described is to the T an anxiety attack, but it also sounds like it's over now. So if it happens again, let me know. So my mom and my sister called me a little while later saying it happened again, but this time she fell over and hit a table, and we think she broke her leg because she can't walk. Can you take her to a clinic? So I did. I called my pediatrician friend again. He got us in. We spent 6 hours there. You know, healthcare in Canada is free, but it takes a long time. So we spent 6 hours there. Every blood test, every scan. They said that if it happens again, let us know. So not no problem. So and I realized what that really meant is if it happens again, we're diagnosing her with an anxiety condition, and she's going to be on a pill, some kind of pill.
100%.
And so at that point, I thought, let me figure out what's actually going on. Dropped her off, went back to work, and I didn't do anything about it. Typical story, to be honest.
Yeah.
Busy guy, went back to work, I didn't do anything. So it happened again, but this time, my mom called me bawling, saying that your niece left a note that she ran away from home.
Mm.
And if you met this girl, completely out of character, very innocent, sweet young girl, but you'd never think, right? So I said, okay, for her, that doesn't mean that she's on a plane flying somewhere. It probably means she's down the street sitting on a park bench and thinking, right?
Hmm.
So I pull up and she's literally down the street, just standing there. And I tell her, get in my car. I was like, what is it? Is it like bullying? Is it school? Like, is it a teacher? What's happening? She didn't know. She was just running away from the feeling. She just needed to get out and just feel different, right? And she had no clue what the problem was. So it was literally right at that point where I opened up my phone, went into my email, and opened up her genetic report, which I already had. And I wasn't looking for anxiety. What I was looking for is what systems were failing that could potentially equal this neurological failure, this symptom she's feeling, because this just happened today. You know, she was 13 years old. Why didn't it happen for the last 13 years?
Bingo.
Right? So I opened it up, and what I found was that in the hormone cascade, we take progesterone, we convert it to testosterone, and we convert that to estrogen. Men and women do the same thing. Women do it monthly, men do it daily. Right? So her cascade looks like at that beginning of the cycle when the hormone levels are at their lowest, because you just had your menstrual cycle, hers go ultra low. Right? So there's a very heavy clearance of, she doesn't have enough estrogen, so she clears everything out very low. So I called my mom and my sister. I was like, can you tell me about her menstrual cycle around the time of this stuff? And then we realized they had been calling me and texting me every month like clockwork. It was happening at the very beginning of her cycle every single time when the hormones were at their lowest. But she had had her cycle for some time. So why now? Right? This happened during peak COVID in Toronto in the winter. We had the longest lockdown of any city in the world. She hadn't been outside in 5 months. Right? She literally never left the apartment in 5 months. And I then looked at her vitamin D pathway, starting to do some detective work, right? And she has the worst possible ability to take D2 from the sun and convert it into D3. She has the worst possibility to take the D3 that she just made and transport it to the cell. There's a different gene that does that. She has a worse possibility to bind it at the cell. So her ability to use vitamin D was dismal, and she didn't get any for 5 months because she hadn't been outside. So now this key micronutrient that powers so many biological functions, we talked about how many genes earlier, 22,000 genes, 2,000 of them require vitamin D to function. So the genetic expression of your genes actually doing their job, you need vitamin D for them to do the job. So hormones failing, the key ingredient that might make things work, not available. Why did it equal an anxiety problem? She has a very low ability to experience dopamine. The receptors in her brain genetically determined there's a gene called DRD2. She has the worst version of DRD2, which means the density of the receptors in her brain is very low. So it's very hard for her to experience pleasure or reward. Her clearance, let's get rid of the dopamine and go back to normal, is really fast. So she feels it way down here and it doesn't last long enough. So she's wired for depression. But she's also wired for achievement because it gives you this reward seeking behavior. That depends on context. Who are you? What are you doing? And you'll determine which bucket you fall in. So her brain was always already teetering on the world sucks. Nothing feel good. I can't get no satisfaction. Vitamin D failed. Hormone cycle already put her in this like bad spot. And the perfect storm hit her and she had these anxiety attacks. So what would have been at that point, hey doctor, it happened again and she ran away from home. Okay, here's the diagnosis and here's the pill, which she probably still would have been on today. Instead became, let's give you 10,000 IU of vitamin D, but we're going to split the dose in half because you don't transport or bind it. So I can't give it to you all at once. And in fact, in the very beginning, I'm going to split it 3 times. And then I'm going to give you a maintenance dose during the second half of your cycle of 5,000 IU because it's not the extreme hormonal dysregulation anymore. And let me give you some L-theanine, which is a basic supplement that boosts your dopamine levels. That was it. It's been 2 years and she has not had this problem once again. So imagine how many people, how many young ladies are out there that we all know of that are talking about anxiety, depression, mood issues, suicide. Today, 1 in 3 teenage girls has considered suicide in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, because of all the hormone disruption in this roller coaster they go on. They're perceiving the world different than it is. This wasn't true a couple generations ago. 30% of the young women in the United States have considered killing themselves.
Wow.
That's the degree to which they can't bear what they have to do every day because of the hormone disruption, because of being locked indoors, because of social media driving what's really going on in the reality, and their bodies not being able to cope, right? So those girls don't need to feel that way if they understood what was causing it.
It's so incredible. 2 simple, cheap supplements totally wipe that out. And so many of us, and we've seen, there was a recent study just showing like 30 years of data that SSRIs and these dopamine, they don't do anything. And these kids, unfortunately, are just immediately put into a box. You have ADHD, you have whatever, you're depressed, you have anxiety, you're on Ritalin. It's just incredible. And it breaks my heart. Yeah, we could solve this just by something as simple as that and knowing and understanding the DNA.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I want to start getting into, because in your book, you outline so many great things like gray hair and testosterone and erectile dysfunction, and I want to get into that at some point. But before I do, I just saw you post recently after coming back from the biohacking conference that Naveen Jain, who owns this company called Viome, and Viome is known for doing these super, I guess, high-end, I don't know if you'd call them high-end, I don't know them too well, but gut test. And I guess the people at the booth were saying, yeah, you don't need to go do a DNA test. Like, we do all of that plus more. Like, that's not going to give you any information.
Yeah.
What do you say to that? And how, what do you say in the sense that, actually, I'm going to ask you, what would you say to that? And then I wanted to ask you, how should we think about DNA in terms of priority? Like, would you say, because we were just talking about, there's so many different things about health. Would you say, hey, first go out doing a DNA test, then do a gut test, then do, or you know what I mean? Like, how should we think about doing our DNA? But yeah, in terms of gut, all you need to know is your gut health. Like, is he wrong?
So his exact words, or his team's exact words, were, "There's nothing your DNA can tell you that you don't already know." That's what they said. Now, that may be true in the Peter Attia version of DNA, right? Which is, it either equals a disease or doesn't. You know you have this problem already, and then there's nothing to do about it. So that's genetics, which I agree doesn't do a good job. Functional genomics is, let's understand your innate biology and just know what jobs your body doesn't do well. And if I know what jobs your body doesn't do well, I know what that could potentially lead to, and I know exactly what habits I should have to counter that. If I know I don't make a certain hormone efficiently, or if I don't metabolize vitamin C, an antioxidant, properly, then I know I need to make a change. Because antioxidation is one of the foundations of longitudinal health. Like, your cells need to be healthy, right? And this can be said of any biological system. So what they said is absolutely not true. It's just their lack of understanding. And I don't even think it's lack of understanding, because I've been on a phone call with Naveen Jain and told him what we do. He knows what we do. It's just not allowing the world to believe and understand what was possible, right? And let's keep the old genetic narrative alive. And so my belief, and this is me going through the healing journey myself, I've done all of that stuff. If you if you start with functional genomics, and this is not me biased because of our company, if you're in this world, you're gonna end up doing our test anyway. So it doesn't matter when you do it, right? I'm telling you that my personal journey, the ease of which you can then go do everything else when you know what to prioritize and focus on, and remove all the trial and error. Everything else, blood work, gut microbiome, Nutrival, like all these things are a measure in time. What is my body doing today? But they're not telling you why. So if I foundationally understand my genomic map, what is your DNA? It's an instruction manual that tells your cells what to do. If you haven't read the instruction manual and you're going to go try and fix things, what are you fixing? Do you know if you're fixing it? You might get it right, perhaps, but most likely not. You're going to go through trial and error. Why can't I lose these last 10 pounds? Why does my gut feel like this? It doesn't matter how many supplements I take, I don't have energy because you're fixing the wrong problem. So if you start with functional genomics, you have the innate map and guide to tell you, first of all, what to prioritize, what should problems should you actually be solving, and then how to solve it. Which supplement to take, what food to eat, which exercise to do. You might decide, I'm going to go start running on a treadmill. That's the thing that might cause you cardiovascular disease, depending on how you're wired. The exact opposite thing of what you think you're getting out of it. For
That
some
was actually
people,
my case, by the
that
way.
was your
We
case,
looked at
right?
what my profile was, and most likely doing cardio or in those intense cardio is actually going to create more oxidation just based on, and I'm more fit for weightlifting. So
Yes, yeah. So and I can't tell you how many people are wired that way. This is why you see, this phenomenon of these soccer players that drop dead at 35. Best doctors.
well, I mean, Kasha, I mean, do we is that really? No, just kidding. Well, we could talk about that. We could talk about why are people dying suddenly.
Well, there's the recent phenomenon we can talk about,
Okay.
but historically, there's been this trend. You can look back 20, 30 years, Olympic sprinters and soccer players that drop dead at 35. It's a consistent trend because a lot of people don't deal with oxidation well. And if you compress that amount of cardiovascular activity into that short of a timeline, and you create that level of inflammation in the endothelium, the arteries, and that level of plaque buildup and oxidation, you're going to get a heart attack, and it's going to be massive. And no doctor at that time is looking for that, right? So this is why you see that. Now, fast forward to today, there's a whole other problem we're dealing with, and it's clear what that problem is. Your peak. So there's no coincidence that people die in their sleep between 3 to 6 a.m. Right? That's the time they die. That time is also when you have peak adrenaline production. So there's a correlation there, right? Peak adrenaline production is the time that people die of heart failure in their sleep. Adrenaline, if you have any damage to the heart, right? Inflammation, scar tissue, abrasions, whatever, and you have an adrenaline rush, it equals a heart attack.
Mm.
So fast forward to a bunch of people that all of a sudden had damaged cardiovascular material, and we can all guess why that happened. And on the field, when they're at their peak, dropping on their face, flat, of heart failure. What's going on there? It's pretty easy to calculate what just happened there. Somebody was caused heart damage, endothelial and the actual structure of the heart. They have inflammation from a certain protein, and now they're being put into a high adrenaline activity that equals heart attack, and that's why you're seeing so much of this, right?
Yeah.
And we can go down an entire rabbit hole just for that. We might need another hour.
Yeah. I actually, but on that note, thank you for that answer about Naveed Jain and Biome and how to prioritize DNA. I love that. Yeah, this should probably be the instruction manual, and then you can go from there. And it just makes sense when you think about people just in terms of in a simple way of just thinking about diet. Like, I tried keto, that didn't work. I tried
Yeah.
vegan, it didn't work. Well, maybe you're hardwired to actually there is a diet for you, and if you just
Yeah.
kind of knew the way your DNA and your systems were working, you could optimize for that. On the talk about people dying suddenly,
Yeah.
I did want to ask you, because last time when we recorded almost 2 years ago, we were talking about we were talking about this issue during the pandemic, but I was curious if you've seen, or if people in this example, people dying suddenly, could they use their DNA to predict if they did get a certain product in their
Yeah.
body that they are most likely going to have a very, very bad reaction? Because obviously we don't see everybody in the world dying suddenly. And I've got
Yeah.
to imagine, well, that's because your DNA, you're optimized a little bit better to deal with these proteins. And I'm wondering if
Yes.
you guys have seen that through just your testing, and people that have done that and maybe collapsed or what?
Yeah. I crossed the Canadian-U.S. border when I wasn't allowed to, we were a communist country at the time, and I took my genetic report with me because tech Canadians were not allowed to enter the United States without some juice in them, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I pulled up to the border and I drove and I showed the guy, here's my genetic report, and here's what's going to happen if I take that stuff. And he looked at me like, well, who are you? What is this all about? I said, listen, for a second, I have a medical reason, right? And I showed him the reason, and he got it, and he let me in. So the
Wow.
reasons are clear that if you have poor cardiovascular hardware, which we can determine genetically, here's your blood vessel, right? It's this tube. The inner lining of the blood vessel is called the endothelium. So it's this cell structure that the blood actually touches and flows, and that's the inner lining. We know what quality you have. Is it resilient stainless steel or is it paper thin? Your genes determine that. And if you have the bad version, well, then send an inflammatory insult into it, and it's probably going to cause you a lot more damage. It's going to take a lot longer for you to recover. That's why some people are having issues like myocarditis, etc., and some aren't.
Yeah.
We also know why is it that young men are having this myocarditis issue and not other demographics?
Yeah. Great point.
Because it's the testosterone. Testosterone is a catalyst of the inflammation caused. And peak testosterone is like, 16 to 19. That's when you're at your highest, right? Where anything that moves, you want to jump
Now,
on top of it, if you know what I
now,
mean.
Kashif, I'm curious on that note because I thought testosterone was very protective to the heart and cardiac in the cardiac area. I thought testosterone was very protective. No, or how does?
Hormones in general are protective, and they're protective of the heart, but they're a catalyst to the toxic part of what we're dealing with proliferating, right? It's kind of think of it as like a key ingredient, a fertilizer,
Yeah. So
right?
what if people are on HRT and hormone replacement therapy or testosterone because that's just all the rage right now. Everyone's on TRT.
Yep.
What if they're on this and they get this product into their body? Or, I mean, I know the testosterone, they're just doing it to actually bring them back up to normal levels, but still, I mean, are we seeing probably a
It's a
higher
catalyst. They're,
correlation?
they're taking an ingredient to fertilize the problem
Wow.
unknowingly. Nobody knows, and I shouldn't say nobody knows. The science is known. It's not being applied.
Yeah.
It's not being shared, right? So this is known. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a PhD. I didn't create this. I read it and learned it, right? So it's available. It's just not being shared. So that's another. And then your methylation response. So once you cause the inflammation here, how well do you fight it? When, like yourself, if you don't detoxify properly, there's a toxic insult now in the blood that is thought that, okay, yeah, there's some toxins, we acknowledge that, but you have a detox system, so you're going to get rid of it. That's what we're told. Some of us don't, like you and like me, by the way,
Yeah.
do not detoxify these types of toxins properly. And it's not only about detoxify, there's different parts to your detox system. So we can determine, is it more the airborne stuff that you breathe that you don't detoxify well? Is it more the gut related, food related toxins that you don't detox? Is it more the stuff that's in the blood? GSTT1 is the gene that goes around looking for stuff in the blood. So we can be very precise about what part of detox is broken for you. And so all of a sudden you can design this avatar with all these various components of what the body needs to be doing with what you just put into it. And you can see which parts of the puzzle are missing, and no way, that person shouldn't do it,
Yeah.
right? And it's very clear.
Great story too. In your book, you talk about one of your friends who's a golfer, and everybody
Yeah.
that knows golfing is high pesticides are sprayed heavily there, glyphosate being one of them. And he had high cholesterol, and he couldn't figure it out. And
Yeah.
any other doctor would have said, go on a low cholesterol diet. And you were like, let's look at your profile. And guess
Yeah.
what? I think it was the GST. He didn't clear well, and it
Yeah.
went all to inflammation was going right to the endothelial, and
Yeah.
that was all. You just had to support that, and boom, he got better.
Yeah. He was on. This guy was a pharmacist, by the way. So he believed he understood his health. and his dose of Lipitor kept going up, and he couldn't figure it out. And so he actually didn't believe in the work we do, you know.
That's the
And
best.
he asked me for pharmacogenetics. So pharmaco is what version of what drug do I need based on the gene that metabolizes the drug. So I said, yeah, no problem. I didn't run the pharmaco. I run our panel anyway. And, and then I came back and showed him, here's the problem, right? And guess what? He doesn't have a problem anymore. You can reverse cholesterolemia. It's your cholesterolemia isn't the disease. Endothelium inflammation is the disease. Cholesterol is how your body's trying to fix it, right?
Yeah. I wanted to let's get into some of the not symptoms, but maybe things that people might have wrong with them, and how the DNA, understanding your DNA and doing the testing that you guys do, how it can really transform and fix. I mean, we're just giving examples right now, but I got a bone to pick with breast cancer. It is, I just told you, man, I've had two friends reach out to me. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer many years ago, and guess what? The doctors all report back it's estrogen related, and it's
Yeah.
just really bothering me because our last podcast we talked about this, and you're like, Joel, this is completely fixable. Talk about that and why it is, because so many women, and this is not just breast cancer, PCOS, endometriosis,
Yeah.
fibromyalgia, all these things.
The entire female hormone health world is the most broken part of healthcare. But keep in mind that all clinical studies are done on men and menopausal women because they don't have cycles, menstrual cycles. So it's just much easier to do. And that menstrual cycle kind of screws up the study. Well, really, what you need to do is two studies, one for someone with a cycle and one without, because it's half the population,
Yeah.
right? So, and this is why healthcare for women sucks so bad. And things like endometriosis, PCOS exist. They shouldn't. These don't need to happen. Um, and breast cancer is a big example. So here's the big red flag that makes it obvious why breast cancer is a choice. So the military has a health database, which is one of the most looked at health databases in the world. It's highly respected because there's a massive population of military troops whose health is tracked, and that data then gives you some level of population data, right? Some trends that you can see. In the last 2 years, there's been a 478% increase in breast cancer in service women.
Whoa.
That's never happened before. Never, ever, 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 ever. Service people are one of the first that were forced to take something.
They're forced to take
Right?
a lot of stuff. Yeah.
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 So you have this almost 500% increase in 2 years. For the first time ever, the American average um, death age, like the age of what, so I think it used to be 78, dropped by 3 years. So the expected life expectancy, right? If it dropped by a couple months, it used to be a massive red flag, like what just happened? It dropped by 3 years and nobody's talking about it. And it's not because people are dying younger, it's because young people are dying. And it's skewing the data. It's pulling the data way back. So what we're seeing is this massive proliferation in cancer, and there's two things. There's what we call literally turbo cancers. That's the new term that's being used. The cancer is two things: inflammation or lack of immunity. You constantly always have cancer in your body, and your immune system is always getting rid of it for you. If you push your inflammation to a level that your body no longer can cope, there's too much to fight, and it gets manifested into a chronic disease. If you push your immune system so down that you don't have enough vigor to fight with, then it's going to also turn into a chronic disease. These are the two things you need to look at. So for women that make estrogens, some make a lot more. They're estrogen dominant, right? And so they have more fuel to make what we call 4 or 16 hydroxyestrogen. These are toxic byproducts. What you want to make is 2. That's the good clean stuff, but 4 and 16 are toxic. And a lot of women do that. So you now have too much estrogen, you're making a toxic version, and then we go back to those same detox profiles of glutathione, methylation, the same stuff we talked about apply here also. You may not be detoxifying it so well. Now, every month you're making this up. Fast forward to today's context. So why wasn't breast cancer such a big deal earlier? Because we already said that our DNA hasn't changed for 250,000 years. We're the same genetic structure. Why now? Well, now the makeup that has all the phthalates and forever chemicals that are hormone mimics as they enter your body, which your body treats as more estrogen, creating more estrogen toxicity. The water that has, kind of chemicals and heavy metals and all these things in it, which is again mimicking hormones. The pesticides in your lawn as you inhale mimic hormones. The mattress you sleep on, the dry cleaning chemicals, all of this stuff. Since the 1970s, there's 144,000 chemicals that have been introduced into humanity.
Yeah.
We didn't have to deal with that before. It's in our food, in our grass, in our clothing. It's in our kids' diapers. It's everywhere, right? So
I just
if
saw you
that,
talk about Lululemon and how they have these fluoride chemicals, and it's like
yeah,
right in the crotch of women. I'm just thinking, oh my
right.
God.
And there's this padding that's in the crotch, and they use forever chemicals in that location, fluorine, which is literally toxic poison in a location, the vaginal cavity, which is highly absorbent of anything that comes into it, directly into the bloodstream. So it's literally poisoning people. It's literally poison, right? So
And
this
Kashif,
is
I just got one last thing. I was just thinking as you're talking, and it makes so much sense. One of my friends, she's like, Joel, but I was taking DIM. And DIM, anybody that knows, that's very popular for quenching some of that extra estrogen and getting it out of the body so you can kind of detoxify it, because women, that's a typical supplement for people that
yes,
have, what did you call estrogen dominance. And I was just thinking, sure, that's great that she was doing that all this time. She still got diagnosed with breast cancer, but we didn't look at how's the gallbladder, how's the GST, how's her other detox pathways, because maybe
yeah,
that it wasn't doing enough, right? That's
yeah.
probably yeah.
And that's where, when you have your genome profile, you know exactly where to intervene. She thought she was doing something right, but it was a different location she needed. It was probably getting rid of the toxin as opposed to the estrogen itself. Right? So what we're told about estrogen, that's too generalized of an answer. It's really the estrogen toxicity, which is the source of the inflammation. So, but again, we look at things disease centric. Once the cancer is there, they look at it being estrogen positive. But why did it happen? What was the cause? Was the toxicity, the inflammation, the lack of immunity? So this is where we're seeing there's too much hormone disruption. Estrogen levels are too high. There's too much estrogen toxicity. There's lack of detox. We don't eat detoxifying foods anymore, right? So the tools we used to have, we don't have. And now people have no immune system because of a choice they made. And that's why you're seeing almost a 500% increase in one thing in women in the military in 2 years.
Wow. The other one too, and I don't want to get too long in it, but it's just like the TRT. I get so, as a health coach, I get so many guys. Should I go on TRT? And I'm just like, dude, you're 30 years old. Like, I mean, you could. I mean,
Yeah.
but I feel like you're missing something. Like, that's not normal. Is what I try to tell them. That's
Yeah.
not normal. You should be making. I mean, obviously we know declines over the years, but
Yeah.
there's something else going on. And I'm sure you would agree. Yeah,
It's the same thing.
it's the
It's
same
the
thing.
hormone
Yeah,
disruption.
yeah.
The men are feeling the exact same problems of the food, the air, the water, the whatever is coming into my system is mimicking estrogen, and I'm going from manly men to not so manly anymore. I'm estrogen dominant, which even you're not genetically wired for. So, and here there's some men that genetically take their testosterone and convert it into estrogen at a high level. So you give that guy TRT, he's just going to grow man boobs.
And that was a great example that you had with a professional NHL hockey player. That
Yeah,
exact thing happened, and they just gave
exactly.
him TRT, and his boobs got bigger. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
fix that right away.
yeah.
What about things like erectile dysfunction? Because you talk about in the book, and I know that's a big one for men as they age and they get older, and they're thinking, well, maybe my testosterone's good or whatever, but you talk about the NOS3, I think,
Yeah.
gene, and that ties in with endothelial function. And same thing. I mean, are we looking?
It's the same side. This is where it gets really cool. Once you start to understand your map and you know biological function as opposed to all these separate siloed problems,
Yeah.
you yourself can start to see over and over again, oh, I already know the answer. Because now I know how my body works. I now know that the endothelium is also in my penis, right?
Yeah.
And I also may have inflammation there, and a certain protein that I just injected into myself may also be residing there
Yeah.
and causing lack of ability to have proper blood flow. And I can't tell you how many men are complaining about erectile dysfunction, not understanding that it was a certain product that they just took that's causing it, because they now have this toxic insult in their endothelium. And yes, the NOS3 genes determine how efficiently you transport nitric oxide in your body, which you need to intake. You don't make it, right? So you need to get it from somewhere. So there's some men that we tell them you need to be on a nitric oxide supplement daily. And so all of a sudden this thing that seems like, oh, I'm aging and I now have this, which is what people believe. It's no, you caused yourself some damage and this is where it's manifesting and it can be reversed,
Yeah.
right? There's plaque that builds up, there's atrophy, and there's inflammation. If you get rid of those things, you get normal function again.
Yeah. This book, your book, and I think everybody, I mean, the more I just dive into this and I was reviewing my own chart, everybody needs to go out and do this. And we can just look at guys and women. If it's even superficial things, I mean, you talk about gray hair loss. For women, cellulite, that's huge. I mean, if you're just like, hey, superficially, I want to fix these things, go do this because that will actually, you will not only fix those things, but you will actually fix all the all
Yeah.
your pathways of inflammation. It's more than the superficial. I wanted to ask you though a question about sleep because I thought this was interesting too. You talk about it in the book, and I never thought about this. Now, my brother, he's like almost 10 years younger than me, and he has all these sleep issues. He's like, Joel, I'm like hot at night. I can never cool myself. He's trying to do Dr. Bruce, the Power of Wind, where he's changing his sleep cycle. Maybe I need to sleep later. And you talk about the clock gene. We have these clock genes that maybe we're more hardwired to sleep at different times, which is what pretty much what Dr. Bruce talks about. But the interesting thing that I didn't ever think about, again, it's all about these systems and how they all interact. And you, for example, just let's say my clock gene is wired for me to sleep at later in the evening. I should fall asleep, let's say, later than someone else. But if someone's not looking at other pathways like BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor,
Yeah.
I don't do something early on in the day, I might be like still hardwired, and that might be causing my insomnia. Is that correct? Kind of a way to think about it? I was thinking about.
Yeah, it's like there's a couple things and they're interwoven and interconnect. So your clock gene and your BDNF, brain drive neurotropic factor, drive your circadian rhythm. So there's some people that don't even know what jet lag means, right? They can reset so easily because they do these things so efficiently. Again, the question of how does my body do this job? The job of regulating my internal clock. So there's some people that don't need an alarm clock. There's some people that lie down on the pillow and fall asleep. There's some people where if you change the lighting, if you change the stress levels, if you change the time they ate their dinner, they can't sleep that night.
Yeah.
This is because the clock is broken. And so again, when it comes to I can't sleep, there's a lot more specificity required and your genes will describe, is it a problem of circadian rhythm where you can't fall asleep on time, clock gene, brain drive neurotropic factor, and then the solutions are very different. It's not take a pill, it's perhaps sauna to upregulate BDNF. It's perhaps some yoga or stretching which upregulates BDNF. It's starting the morning with the right dose of vitamin D and sunlight to start the clock because your clock doesn't work. So your body needs a push. Or it may be like, hey, I don't have a problem falling asleep, but I wake up every day at 3 a.m. and the second half is nowhere near the same quality. Like what you were describing, the
Yep.
guy that feels too hot, too cold, right? That's a serotonin issue. It's not a melatonin or a BDNF or a circadian rhythm issue. So most of the sleep solutions don't solve that problem.
He's
And
tried
speaking of,
everything. He's tried
yeah,
everything. Yeah.
tried everything. And so by the way, speaking of Dr. Bruce, I worked on him for this, right? Like he was literally stuck as this world leader in this area, but this was the one thing he couldn't figure out because we all think about sleep as when we fall asleep. We don't think about what happens in your sleep. And your body is waiting for the signal of sunlight to wake up. That's how we're wired. And sunlight triggers the binding of serotonin, which then truly wakes you up and you start to make cortisol and you're like up and ready to go. So if your serotonin is dysregulated because the receptors are too short, which we can determine genetically, then your brain doesn't know how to prioritize stimulus. And it doesn't know, is that sunlight? It could be too hot, too cold, the blanket touched your face in the wrong way, somebody's foot touched you, whatever. Every single little stimulus, your brain wakes up to like, is that sunlight? Oh no, go back to sleep. Is that sunlight? Go back to sleep. And so you're constantly stuck in this like in and out, in and out, in and out. This screws up more people's sleep than any other sleep problem. And it is the least diagnosed problem because everyone's thinking about falling asleep. So yeah, I had the same problem by the way, and now I sleep fine because I've understood what I need. I need a sleep cocoon. I need perfect temperature. I need zero light leakage. I need my own separate blanket, you know. Like there has to be zero stimulus, and then all of a sudden, and you can take 5-HTP supplements before going to sleep to manage your 5-HTT LPR pathway, as it's called. 5-HTP is a known serotonin supplement. 5-HTT LPR is the pathway we look at genetically. You do all of these things, and then the problem goes away, right?
So amazing, man. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour and want to wrap things up. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you've learned so much about DNA, and we've got thought leaders out there like Dave Asprey who want to live to 180. Do you really think it's possible to extend our lifespan that at right now, where we're in 2023? Can we go that far?
I do think it's possible to live to 120 in a healthy way.
Yep.
I think that if you look at human biology, it points to that. I think there's potential ways to crack that code. Um, I don't think we have that yet. I think we have science on products and services that could get us to 150 or 180, but the body is not wired for that, right? So I think 120 is a healthy number. And I think if you live to 120 in a healthy way, most of your friends and family probably won't, and you're going to be lonely anyway, right?
Great point.
You
Yeah.
know, because
Yeah.
you're going to be in a very isolated community of healthy people. 95% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy and are not getting anywhere near 100. Forget about 120,
Yeah.
right?
So true.
So it's also a lifestyle question of why live to 180, right? And depending on what your beliefs are and if there's anything that happens after this life, right?
Yeah.
So I think 120 is a healthy number and it's achievable.
Love that. Thank you. You just came out with the book. What else is going on? Any other exciting projects you guys are doing at the DNA company? A book is a massive undertaking, so congratulations.
Yeah,
But yeah, anything? What else is exciting and new coming up for us?
yeah, and I know you just went through the same thing, so you know the pain.
Yes.
It's like working your third shift at night trying to figure out how stupid you sound when you're writing something down,
Yep.
right? And so yeah, it's challenging. And so the next phase is now that we have this foundation of we really believe we understand the body well and we interpret the genome better than most, I believe. Now we need to clinically apply it, which is we've actually partnered with a telemedicine company to say, here's all of what we know, here's how we can deal with disease better, here's how we can help people better, here's how we can prevent it even. How do we get this to more people? So it's not so much about the testing as it is about our insights and what we know, what we learn from the testing to then apply in clinical practice. So that's the next thing we're building
Wow.
is how do we go to an employer who needs to understand what their insurance pays for, and fit that model. So that's what we're trying to build right now.
That's really neat. And one thing that we talked about briefly in our last podcast too, I was just thinking is, I was a former first responder, and we were talking about just the military and first responders, and you were saying, Joel, there's actual genes that we can look at and show that if this person gets involved in a shooting or something traumatic, he will be wrecked. Whereas someone else, their genes are more optimized for that. And I think it's just like you're talking about, there's that preventative damage. I mean, imagine if companies were doing this and saying, sorry, buddy, but like you're going to get trashed if you get in a shooting or something. It's
Yep.
just going to wreck you. And I've seen that in my career. I've seen guys have like what I would call I'm like, really? You retired medically because of that? I'm like, I've been to like millions of those scenes of
Yeah.
suicides and stuff like that. How did that affect you? And a lot of guys will say, oh, he was just a wimp and he's soft, he didn't do it. And now after talking to you, I go, yeah, maybe there's more to that.
Yep. And that same thing that feels like their kryptonite is also their superpower. So that same thing that in that context led to trauma and pain that they can't get over, the ability to bind emotional trauma, which some people genetically do better than others, also leads to emotional intelligence, being able to read the room. No, so that person would probably be an amazing doctor. They'd probably be an amazing caretaker, but they were in the wrong context. So imagine knowing that for your child and how are they wired and where would they actually thrive? Because the same thing that can make you thrive can be your kryptonite.
Before we end, that's a great thing. I have two boys, 9 and 5.
Yeah.
How soon would you run the DNA, or have you done that, for your
All
family?
my
I mean,
kids, yeah. They're
yeah.
now
How soon would you do it, in your opinion?
as soon as they can spit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because every choice you make is now personalized. You no more
Yeah.
guesswork. And I've done it for all three of them, even my niece, as we talked about, right? My cousins in Vancouver and different places, I'm getting them all tested. So yeah, as soon as they can, and in fact, we have a kit for children that has a sponge, so parents can just do it. The kid doesn't even need to spit. So yeah, every choice you need to make can be personalized. The question of what sports should they play, what career are they wired for,
Mm.
what should they eat, why are they a drama queen, how do you discipline them? All of these things that we get stuck with trial and error and blaming things like ADHD, like you talked about, which most of the time isn't true. It all can be unpacked at a personalized level.
Wow, so cool. My man, Kashif Khan, thank you so much. You have an incredible Instagram handle where you drop. You're one of the very few that I actually watch your reels because they actually make me smarter, and I can't say that for many. So I appreciate you. But if people don't know you and the DNA company, where can they find you, connect with you, learn more about you, and everything that you guys are up to?
So yeah, the DNAcompany.com, that's where the testing is if you want to learn more. I have my sample report up there if people want to see what it looks like. And the Instagram is KASHKHAN official. And yeah, that's where I go to like vent and just explain like whatever happened in the clinic the day before, some stupid chemical or some food or some new thing we learned that makes people sick. I just talk about it, and that's why I'm there. In our podcast, the Unpilled podcast, which by the way, we need to have you on.
I would love to come on.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
got to do that soon. It's designed for people to learn about how we think, right? So we'll talk about health issues in this context of the root cause. But we need to have you on there soon, actually.
That'd be great.
That'd be an awesome thing for you to join us. So yeah, so that's where you can learn more.
That's amazing. I appreciate you, man. Thank you. You're doing so much in the world, and you've really turned me around. I just say personally, when we first met, I was like, yeah, but Kashif, my naturopathic mentor told me that the DNA is what loads the gun, but our lifestyle and environment pulls the trigger, and there's truth to that. But
Yes.
really, I mean, after just going deep into your testing and stuff, there's more. There's a nuance to that's being misunderstood, I think, by a lot of practitioners. So you've completely turned me around. I appreciate you, and thank you, man.
Pleasure, man. Good talking to you.